Hello, welcome to the reading of chapter 8 of To MILELE. Glad you're back. In chapter 7, we entered the mist patch with hope. That was quite the journey, an interesting place. We also learned that fishing will start on the island, as it's an island mostly for crop production. So this will be actually an added responsibility of the people on Eden too. We also had a humorous moment with the boys, Cree and Lucas, who tried to fix the toilet thingy and had most of it on them. And then for a more somber moment, we were back in Israel, where we met Mendex Nubian, who Keiko described as the man behind him, and with plans well on their way to having a world leader. All right, so let's do chapter 8 and 9, because chapter 8, again, is a short chapter, because we're going to go to Jennies outside of time. The creature who, in former times, was one of the most beautiful of all creation, resembled nothing of his original self. Beauty had once radiated from him, and music more beautiful than could be imagined by humans had flowed from him. Wisdom had poured from him like a fountain. He was one of 3 who'd been highly favored. However, now, not only was his appearance different, but even his name had been changed. Dragon. He had also changed in substance. Darkness now filled his being, and hate and falsehood were his dominant traits. There was no light, no beauty, no forgiveness, no peace. His melody was irreparably corrupted. He was, in essence, doomed. Doomed to a state he'd chosen himself when he chose to lead a rebellion against the sovereign emperor. Although the great majority of the emperor's warriors remained loyal, a large number had followed Dragon in the betrayal. Yet Dragon dared to come and bid audience with the sovereign emperor. It was unthinkable that he was allowed to present himself, and yet the emperor allowed it. Sovereign Prince Adani was seated on his father's right, the 2 on thrones high above the court below. He regarded the creature in silence. It was general knowledge that Dragon's audience with the emperor was allowed only for a time. The curse upon him repealing his former state was punishment enough for now. A greater and more final judgment would come and would be forever. "Why have you come?" the emperor asked. His voice was powerful and filled with warning. The creature trembled before him, causing even the misshapen, bubble-like void that surrounded him and contained his overpowering stench to shake. The void, in essence, was its own entity, its own dimension, which kept Dragon separate, yet in the presence of court. Dragon morphed into many different forms, all grotesque, and all indicating his dread and excruciating distress before the emperor. And yet he managed to speak many words of accusations against those loyal to Prince Adani, claiming rights over them. It was always Dragon's way to expostulate against humanity, contending that they'd willingly subjected themselves to the Velchgist, which gave him all rights to destroy them. And it was always the prince's way to then break his silence and advocate against Dragon's complaints. As the prince stood to his feet, once again to tirelessly champion for humanity, the entire court lay prostrate in honor of his worthiness. Well, that's quite the scene in Jennies, and quite the character, Dragon, that we have met. Okay, chapter 9, we're back in Eden on Eden 2. He's a wildcat, Captain Nick yelled, his voice raised above the powerful drone of the fighter jet cavorting through Eden 2's clear airspace. Ground crew paused their work, necks arched, eyes trained above. Like he was born with wings, Gideon held one hand up, shielding his eyes from the late afternoon sun. Gotta love it! He laughed loudly as the plane took a nosedive before leveling off. Michael Shanxi was, for all intents and purposes, doing an air show. It was Michael's third day of flying and his first solo. Colonel Davenport's gonna love him, Gideon continued. He should, except he's not one for bells and whistles. Captain Nick's head was flung back, watching the jet descend for landing. He'd rather pure, unadulterated skill with a good dose of soberness. The landing was smooth and expert on the runway. Sir, I believe he's the most skilled, better than me even. As for soberness, well, I guess time will tell, Gideon said. After Michael emerged from the plane, ground crew took over. He walked toward Gideon and Captain Nick, helmet in hand. A surge of pride and camaraderie filled Gideon to know such a man was now with them. A man who walked with such power and confidence. A man he felt, for some odd reason, he could count on. Indeed, you can count on him. Jolted from his reverie, Gideon quickly turned to look behind him. Agios's tender gaze did not remain on him for long, but instead shifted with a purposeful look. Gideon turned to see the focus of his gaze. Michael, recently dubbed Agent Mike by his comrades, was also focused in one direction, Agios. He stopped in front of Captain Nick and Gideon. As he stood before them with his eyes squinting against the sun, palpable energy radiated from him. Well, men, Captain Nick began, I must say our time has not been wasted. He put a hand on Agent Mike's shoulder. You're definitely a keeper among Eden 2's ranks. Welcome to the fold, Agent Mike. Agent. An unusual title for a military pilot, but Agios had come up with it. Gideon stood by, feeling like a proud papa, then turned, curious to see Agios's reaction. But he was gone. New scene. From Hope's usual perch on the high point above Agri 6, the air show had been brilliant to watch, for that's what it had been. She had yet to meet the new pilot. Usually, though, newbies sought her out, not the other way around. The world had heard of the island princess long ago. For the most part, the outside world didn't see her as a loyal. They'd claimed her as their own, and fictitious stories of her abounded. However, it was no longer possible to keep up with each and every new recruit to Eden 2, especially with the numbers growing steadily and sometimes in leaps and bounds. After all, large groups of people sometimes applied for work on the island at the same time. Of course, Hope knew why they were found in groups. Nathan kept her abreast of world affairs. The world had become a desperate place in their love-hate relationship with the Loyals. And so the Loyals found support in rallying together. The Council of Nations supporters saw them as a threat that was blocking the full effect of the Weltgeist. But yet they were necessary for the work on Eden 2. Others saw them as commodities for the precious so-called Eden 2 blood, which had sparked a whole new world of underground criminal activity. It was as if literal vampires had resurrected, believing that blood transfusions from those with Eden 2 DNA, especially children, would allow them special access to the island. There had even been reports of deaths as a result of some unsuccessful and usually unskilled attempts to get the blood. Hope was also aware of another prevailing thought that focused on Prince Adani's sky kingdom as somehow being responsible for the mist. And since most believed Prince Adani to be unreachable or dead, they focused their hostilities on his followers. Added to this was the belief that the Israelis were somehow in league with the loyals. And this was why they, along with Eden too, had been spared the blinding, debilitating shroud of mist. Israel's surrounding neighbors, who had already been long awaiting the demise of the small nation, experienced Israel's apparent escape from the ravages of the asteroid as yet more salt in their prejudicial wounds. Presently, there were two inhibiting factors that protected Israel and earned them a grudging reprieve from Israel's enemies: Israel's crop food stores and Keiko Bay's continual support of Israel's right to exist. Hope sighed grudgingly. At least Keiko was good for something. But even so, Keiko's goodness on this point didn't do anything to stem the popularity of the Weltschgeist, which had recently gained momentum, pushed by the popular philosophical guru Mendex Nubian. His message that an ancient power behind the Weltschgeist was ready to save the planet and humanity had gained notoriety. He purported that the vial had failed humanity not because of itself, but because the existence of the loyals immensely disturbed the peaceful flow of the universe. All opposition to the Weltschgeist first had to be removed, including the belief in a dead prince. Keiko had challenged Hope on this very issue. Now, if you remember, the vial was given to humanity by the Weltschgeist, and humanity exchanged the key from the sovereigns for that. As Hope began her descent to lower ground, she sighed deeply. She wished Keiko would simply stay off Eden 2 and leave her alone. At least she partly wished he would stay away. The conflicting desire that still resided within her wasn't easily owned. After all, how could she be loyal to Prince Adani and yet be stirred by Keiko's attentiveness? Perhaps Ruth and Bo's company could bring some healthy focus, for how could she dare face Agios with such a thing? A gentle breeze accompanied her down, bathing her skin. Then suddenly her refreshed skin felt charged. She soon understood why. Agios was waiting for her below. As her sneakered feet quickly found their way over the next grassy brow, joy came, followed by remorse at her previous thoughts. Even so, she hadn't seen him the last 24 hours. Her steps quickened. Agios, she said. He held out a hand to steady her descent, his grip warm and sure. His wavy dark brown hair rustled lightly in the breeze, and his warm brown gaze captured hers. When she reached ground level, he turned, still holding her hand. "Walk with me," he said. "Let us talk of Prince Adani." Hope's peripheral vision registered her shadow guard, but her entire being was tuned to Agios's words. The last time they spoke of Prince Adani, it had not gone well. She'd been filled with more accusations than anything else until Agios had relinquished her, stating that they would return to the subject at a later date. That had been almost 3 months ago. With her hand now released, they strolled side by side on level ground along the path leading from the mountain. Agios's voice was low and conversational, giving no hint of what was coming. "You were just a child when your parents first told you about Prince Adani. At that time, much of the world believed him to be dead." "Yes," Hope responded uneasily. He wasn't asking her, he was telling her. and you learned all you needed to know as you grew up. You accepted and believed your parents' loyalties to Prince Adani despite the popular trends of the world. Hope studied Agios carefully as they walked. Against the backdrop sounds of the waterfall, she could hear the distant drone of activity along the airstrip and the inconspicuous voices of the island's residents inside the compound. The agri workers had returned from the field. Pardon me. Her travel cart was just ahead. She turned to breathe easily. She tried to breathe easily. You were 18 when you pledged your loyalty to him, Agios continued. Hope wanted to pause their walk. Yes, but Agios, we've been through this before. He stopped and faced her. And how did it go? Her gaze faltered under his, but with steely determination she held on. You tried to force me to accept something I wasn't ready for. Agios was like having a father, a brother, a friend, and confidant all rolled into one. He definitely felt like a father at present. Forced you? His question was so startlingly simple. His gaze and manner, while not judgmental, were uncomfortably convicting. Hope stumbled over her words. Well, maybe force isn't the best choice. She looked down at his sandaled feet. Her gaze slowly traveled back up. I did behave rather badly. Agios smiled, gently, with understanding. Then he sobered. You know, it must be discussed. Hope looked to her right, catching a glimpse of the patch. She remained silent, knowing what was coming. The subject of your betrothal. The inner turmoil, was deafening to her own ears. Her heart and head were pounding. The stubborn fog concealing the memory held strong. Remember that Hope had amnesia about a certain incident. The subject of your betrothal to Prince Adani. The words came forth like something being breathed into her. The fog dispersed. There, Agios had said what she dreaded to hear, what she found inconceivable, and what had been buried in her memory for years. It was unbelievably ludicrous. She's betrothed to Prince Adani. Chew on that for a while. New scene. Ruth paused in the corridor outside the door of the Nutrition and Wellness Center. Viewing Hope through the glass, she could immediately tell something was wrong. Hope looked up and smiled at one of the center's assistants as he lifted a hand in farewell. He then headed toward Ruth with a manual clutched at his side. Ruth pushed the door and he held it open, letting her through. She smiled her thanks. The darkening sky outside made for a dim room. Not all the lights were on. In keeping with conservation of the solar and water-generated electricity on Eden 2, this was the usual practice. Hi, Hope greeted, wearily, slumping back against her chair. She ran her hands over the curls bound at the nape of her neck. Ruth eased onto the chair before Hope's table-like desk. She leaned forward, letting her elbows rest on the desk, chin on her hands. All right, spill it. Amber eyes that looked brown in the dim light were filled with emotion. Excuse me. I can see that glazed look in your eyes when you've been chewing on something too long with no end in sight. Ruth sat back. What is it? Ugh, Hope groaned, swiveling her seat sideways before getting up. You don't want to know. She grabbed a file from her desk and went to the shelves behind, where she inserted the file between two others. She turned halfway to look at Ruth. I don't even understand. Try me, Ruth prompted. It's so complicated. Ruth folded her arms. What? A new plant made someone ill? Your staff has gone AWOL. The new nutritional program is a flop. She stopped at Hope's humorous grimace. Ruth, there's something I need to tell you. Only a few people knew this, and I'm not sure how long before others know. Hope squeezed her eyes shut briefly, then placed both palms flat against the desk and leaned in. I know this is going to sound crazy, but... She paused, stared down at the desk, then back at Ruth. I was actually betrothed to someone years ago. Ruth unfolded her arms. What? Betrothed? As in marriage betrothed? At Hope's nod, a shocking thought crossed her mind. Not Keiko Bays! The incredulous look on Hope's face made her laugh. Well, other than Governor Peter, you're the only other person on Eden 2 who gets a private audience with him, Ruth said. No, Ruth. Hope sat back down. This is even harder to believe. Tell me. And you must promise to tell absolutely no one, Hope said. Ruth took a deep breath. I promise. Prince Adani. I'm betrothed to Prince Adani. What? For a moment, Ruth couldn't make sense of what she'd heard, but she couldn't have heard wrongly. Hope had said his name twice. It's true, Hope confirmed with a look of resignation. A tardy revelation flowed into Ruth's mind. Of course, it absolutely made sense. Why had she not seen it all along? She got up. Couch. Hope left the shelter behind her desk and followed Ruth to a well-worn couch along the opposite wall, close to the back of the room. A small coffee table with old magazines strewn across its wooden surface centered the couch. They sat, half facing each other. Ruth studied her friend carefully, saw the trepidation on her face, the arms clutched across her chest, wrinkling her white blouse, and the tension in her rigid posture. Ruth said, in the truth tone, Prince Adani promised that the Loyals would one day rule with him in the Sky Kingdom. Yes, Hope affirmed. Ruth continued, and he would bring in a new world order where everything would be made new and perfect. Ruth continued, still struggling with the profound implications of Hope's announcement. Yes, the sovereign emperor declared years ago that a kingdom, the Sky Kingdom to be exact, was being prepared for his son and all those loyal to him. Ruth paused, trying to find the right words for her next thought. And the catalyst for this was his bride, his betrothed, made ready. Yes, Hope's wary expression had barely changed. Of course, my betrothal to him is also in representation of all loyals. Ruth waited, but Hope didn't continue. Ruth said, then you, Hope, Kanisa, are the catalyst? Yes. On my life, Ruth breathed out, feeling slightly lightheaded. All this time, you've been the one? So let's leave us dangling at the end of chapter 9. And hope you join me next time for chapter 10 on this great adventure. Take care.